This is the book of Numbers as we have it in our English Bibles. It wasn't the original title of the book. Originally, the title of the book translated is In the Wilderness. That's the name of the book. It's also referring to, or has been referred to as the Book of Wanderings. Obviously, it has something to do with, it's going to have a great deal to do with how the Jewish people, the early days, wandered for 40 years through the wilderness and why they wandered for so long. The reason we call it the Book of Numbers is because it is a book that has a couple of different censuses, meaning the numbering of the people. God ordered Moses to number a certain segment of the people of the Jewish population. Not all of them. God didn't like them to count numbers. It's something that Christian churches should also consider. It's not a good idea necessarily to count numbers. We care more about souls in heaven rather than seats in the seats. So it's better that we think of it in that way. But God was really concerned about these numbers for the sake of putting together an army. That's what these numbers primarily were about. Part of their journey through the wilderness had to do with a lot of battles. And so Numbers actually shows us the stamina or the perseverance that is necessary as we face battles in our Christian life, spiritual battles, spiritual difficulties. The stamina, the perseverance that is necessary in our Christian walk as these early saints of Israel walked through the wilderness and faced all sorts of difficulties, hardships, trials, battles, enemies, dangers, and they survived it. And it is also the lesson that we can also take away from this book is the necessity of holiness. God demands holiness. Not only does He demand holiness, He demands and expects obedience. So when He says that He wants us to do something, He expects that we will do it. And of course, Moses was very big on that. He obeyed for the most part. And I'll explain what that means as we get a little further into the studies here. But let's, with that introduction, actually, I think it's worth saying that the book was written somewhere around 1440 BC, 1440 BC, and actually was written over a period of time and expected that it was finished around 1400 BC, which is approximately when the Jews would have crossed over the Jordan and into the Promised Land. So a 40-year journey for the most part, and it is something to think about. I know that was 60 years, but that's the writing of all of it. But they journeyed for 40 years, maybe even more, as they wandered through the wilderness in their, I hate to say it this way, but because it took so long because of their lack of faith and their disobedience. So that's why there's so many good lessons for us to learn in here. Well, in verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of meeting. That's the sanctuary, or the tabernacle of meeting is the tent that they had put up. And on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying. Now this is after all of the tabernacle articles, the furniture, the pieces of furniture, everything was put up. And so Moses now was able to go in and meet with the Lord in this private chamber, the tabernacle, where the Ark of the Covenant was. And while he was in there, the Lord spoke to him and said, "Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually." So the men were to be numbered, in verse 3, from 20 years old and above. All who are able to go to war in Israel. So it wasn't a full census, but had to do with them needing to know who was able to go to war, those who were able to go to war in Israel, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies. So this is really a poll or a taking of a census for the sake of assembling different armies and regiments of armies that would be able to fight and be victorious. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one of the heads of his father's house, and these are the names of the men who shall stand with you. From Reuben, and he takes a list of names of all of these different individuals from the 12 tribes of Israel. So there are going to be 12 representatives of each tribe, each family, and they're going to be a part of the board of directors under Moses, as they will become the staff or the leaders of these armies. And so verse 16, these were chosen from the congregation, leaders of their fathers' tribes, heads of the divisions in Israel. These divisions or regiments, we would call them. These were men who were chosen. They were chosen leaders, called, appointed, and anointed by God. This was not Moses' choice, not that he had any qualms with them, but it was God who instigated this whole thing. And it kind of gets me to realize the real call to ministry, the call to be a leader among God's people, should be from God. This is a place where we churches get ourselves in a lot of trouble because we often put the wrong people in the wrong places at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. And when that happens, all the wrong things happen. And it causes trouble, and then we have to kind of get ourselves through and sometimes out of. So we have to be careful, as Paul said in the New Testament, writing to Timothy, that we do not lay hands on anyone too suddenly. And the idea of the laying on of hands, though some things, don't be too quick to punch someone in the face. It's probably not what it really means. But don't be too quick to put someone in leadership or in a position of ministry. You want to be able to test it and see, to make sure, is this God's man? Is this the one that God is calling? And if so, then we can lay hands on that person and say, we concur, this is the Lord's calling on this man's life. And so this is something that I take away from this when I see all of these names that are listed, and they were chosen by God. Something in them that God said, yes, that's the one I want. I mean, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of men, but God chose these 12 and put them into this position of leadership over his armies. Then Moses took these men, verse 17, who had been mentioned by name. The Lord brought them out by name. And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. They recited their ancestry by families. Verse 19, as the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. Now, it's important that you realize this is the numbering in the wilderness of Sinai. There's going to be a second numbering near the end of the book of Numbers. That will be the numbering in the plains of Moab. Moab is just before they enter into Israel for the first time. So there is the mountains that are there, and this is where they assembled as they took this census over there. Interestingly enough, they have more people here in this chapter than they're going to have in chapter 26, where the second numbering is mentioned. There are other numberings, by the way, that happen in the book of Numbers. For instance, we're going to see the numbering of the armies was one thing, but God specifically said, don't number the Levites. And he's going to explain why. And then at some point, he's going to have the Levites numbered separately from everyone else. So here is the numbering, and we have the statistics, if you will, from beginning with the oldest son of Israel, or the son of Jacob, which is Reuben. Of course, Reuben is now no longer with them. Reuben is long gone. And so a family member of Reuben's had to step up and become the leader of the tribe of Reuben. Now the children of Reuben, Israel's oldest son, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, every male individually from 20 years old and above, all those who were able to go to war. So 20 years and above simply means that at some point they're going to stop counting because he's too old to go to war, so we're not going to count him. So it's sort of, I guess, how well off they're going to be in their aged situation. Like, for instance, I'm too old to go to war. I can tell you that right now. Well, anyway, verse 21, those who were numbered of the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. So those were the men who were going to represent the family, the tribe of Reuben in war. 46,500. In verse 23, those who were numbered of the tribe of Simeon were 59,300. In verse 25, those who were numbered from the tribe of Gad were 45,650. In verse 27, those who were numbered of the tribe of Judah, this was a big tribe, they were 74,600, giant tribe. And then in verse 29, Issachar were 54,400. Verse 31, Zebulun 57,400. Verse 33, Ephraim 40,500. Verse 35, Manasseh 32,200. So this is a small tribe. It was a small tribe to begin with, so a smaller population of soldiers would come out of that. Same with Benjamin. Benjamin, verse 37, 35,400. And the tribe of Dan, verse 39, 62,700. And all of these, we have in verse 41, Asher, 41,500. And then verse 43 is the last, is Naphtali, and there were 53,400. Now, you want a total of all that? He gives it to us in verse 46. All who were numbered were 603,550. So that's the size of their current army at this point in their history. 603,550. In the book of Numbers 26, as I said in verse 51, it's 601,730. So the army dwindled, and that obviously you'd be surprised how they survived that many, considering all the years that they spent wandering in the wilderness and fighting battles and doing all sorts of other things. And this was still necessary because when they go into the promised land, they're going to have more battles to fight. And verse 47, but the Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. So, in other words, Levi was one of the sons of Israel. He was not going to be numbered in the same way as the other sons of Israel because God had a special task for them. Verse 48, for the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel, but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it, to the tabernacle. And they shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. So Levites were not to be warriors. They were ministers. They were ministers of the gospel of that time, I guess is a way of putting it. Ministers of the temple is the way to put it. Prior to the temple, the tabernacle. Their job was equally important, perhaps even more important than the job of the soldiers, though their job was also important. But when the tabernacle, verse 51, is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. The outsider has no place in this ministry. The outsider has no position here. There's no room for outsiders in the ministry. And it scares me to think, when you think about how many ministers are in the pulpit today who are not called to the ministry and have no business being in the ministry. But yet they call themselves ministers, and they do a lot of damage because they're not supposed to be in those positions. But God doesn't want anyone who has no business being there to be there. So anyone who is an outsider and comes near to this aspect of the ministry, they need to be put to death. In verse 52, the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, everyone by his own camp, everyone by his own standard, according to their armies, but the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony. So here's the details. In chapter 2, we're going to get to in just a minute. God is going to, now he's got these numbers, right? And so he's taking these numbers and he's going to separate them into different tribes, encircling the tabernacle as it parks itself, as they park it somewhere in their journeys in the wilderness. And every time they would walk for a while, they would stop, and God would say, stop here, set up the tabernacle, and they'd stay there for a while. They'd worship, they'd offer sacrifices, they'd rest, they'd get some more supplies, do whatever they needed to do, and then God would say, now it's time to go. Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. And they had God's presence always there above that tabernacle to symbolize the presence of the Lord. And here were the Levites then around the tabernacle. That was their camp. Their families, their little kids, they all played around that tabernacle with a little bit of distance because no one was allowed to go there if you didn't belong there. All of the Levites belonged there. And so they had their camp completely surrounding the tabernacle. And out from there, from the east to the west, to the north, to the south, all of the other 12 or 11 tribes would then park themselves or camp out around the outside of the Levites. And I thought about this, and I thought this is actually kind of cool. It's sort of significant in its symbolism. As you think about, God is in the center of the nation. God is not only in the center of the nation, but God is protecting the nation. At the same time, the nation is protecting the position of God within the nation. And that seems to be the way it used to be, if I could put it that way, in our land to some degree. You know, we say very often that we are or were a Christian nation, and we were actually a nation that was built on the understanding that all of our life and being comes from God. The U.S. Constitution, and not the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence tells us that all of there are certain inalienable rights that come from God. In the first sentence, God is mentioned. The second sentence, it refers to the Creator. And so we know that God was in the minds of the formers of our government way back in the early 1700s as they were thinking about breaking away from England. God was at the center. It eventually evolved to where God became a part of a lot of our culture, and we even have it on our money. In God we trust. That came along later, I realized that. But my point is that God was a part of it, and God blessed this country. God blessed us and blessed us greatly. And we kept God sort of in a right place in our culture. But obviously that's changed now. We see that it's changed, sadly, and we've removed God from many places in our culture. And I have to believe that the things we're sensing in our culture today has a direct result in that God has been evicted from the central place of our country. I know some of us still hold to that or wish that or believe that, but I think if we are being honest, we look at the way we go and how decisions are made, how things are done, I think we know that God doesn't really play as big a part in our modern day government as he did in the old government that we used to have. And so we're divided as a people. We're really divided. And you know what Jesus said about a divided house. A house that is divided cannot stand. And so that's what happened to Israel. God was in the center. But eventually they sort of evicted God, and they brought in false gods and all other kinds of gods. And it brought it brought such great trouble upon them. And they ceased to become a nation. And I do fear for America. I'm not one who believes in I don't believe that America cannot be toppled. I would like to think that it can't, but that's just wishful thinking of a human mind. I think that the reality is that when we put God above all things, then there is a divine protection upon those people. Blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. And those who don't honor God, God has no obligation to honor them. None. So this is the children of Israel pitch their tents. The Levites in the center shall be around the tabernacle of testimony and all the tribes around it. And chapter 2 talks about where God positions all of these tribes. Every one, verse 2, of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of the father's house, of his father's house. And these emblems, these standards, or we would call them a family crest. You familiar with the family crest? If you think of England, and they have these placards that hang on the wall of all the different families that are represented in the clans and different things, and all of them represent the family. And if you're part of that family, somewhere in your family tree, you're going to have that crest. And that's what these standards were. And there were different types of standards of the division that you belonged to in the nation of Israel, kind of a thing. Our military has the different badges or patches that would indicate that you belong to this group or to that group. That's sort of what this was like, but more so because this identified the entire tribe or the segment of tribes. And so they were to camp out under those appropriate emblems of his father's house. But notice it says, they shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. And meaning God didn't want them too close to the tabernacle of meeting for a couple reasons. It's dangerous there to be too close because God is holy and doesn't want warriors' blood near him, kind of a thing. And secondly, because that was the closer spots were reserved for the Levites. That's where their families were to camp out. So, verse 3, on the east side is where Judah shall camp according to their armies. And all of the families of Judah had their different regiments and divisions. Within the family of Judah, they all camped there. And, verse 5, those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Issachar. Nathaniel, and he names a bunch of the family members there. Verse 7, then comes the tribe of Zebulun. And they are all going to be on the east side of the tabernacle. And verse 9, all who were numbered according to their armies was 186,400. So it says that these are going to break camp first. So when it's time to go, Judah, you're going to lead the way. So they get up first and they go. On the south side, it tells us in verse 10, you're going to have Reuben. Verse 12, you'll have Simeon. Verse 14, you're going to have Gad. And this is on the south side of the tabernacle of meeting. That's where you will camp out. Every time we pick up and go and we stop for however long we're going to stop, you're going to be on the south side. It's just a given. This is where you will always be. This is your reserved parking for the rest of the days of our wandering. And they had 151,000, verse 16, it says this, 151,450. In verse 18, on the west side will be Ephraim. Verse 20, Manasseh. In verse 22, Benjamin. And his army, verse 23, was numbered at 35,400. And verse 24 says the same thing. Let's see. And they shall break third. And obviously, Judah was first. Reuben was going to be second. And then, did I say Reuben? I forgot who that was. Reuben will be second. And they're going to break second. And then here, verse 25, on the north side shall be Dan. Verse 27, Asher. Verse 29, Naphtali. So God has them all divided up. And the total number, as I said, was 603. That's mentioned again in verse 32. But it says, verse 33 again, but the Levites were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord commanded. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards, so that they broke camp, each one by his family, according to their father's house. So protect God's place in your life, and He, God, will protect your life. That's why God is in the middle of these tribes. He, of course, remember the pillars, the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. This was their reminder. Imagine every morning they would wake up, they'd go grab a cup of coffee, and there was that cloud. And immediately they realized, God is with us. God is here. He's here. And it had to have an effect on their mind and what they saw and what they experienced on a day-to-day basis. So a beautiful picture of how God was in the center of their lives. In chapter 3, finally we come to the designation of the Levites under the leadership of Aaron. Now, these are the records of Aaron and Moses when the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. These are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab, the firstborn, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed priests, whom he consecrated to minister as priests. Now, he reminds us in verse 4, Nadab and Abihu had died before the Lord when they offered profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Ithamar ministered as priests in the presence of Aaron, their father. So the two oldest were killed because they did foolishly, and the next two stepped up and became now the head of the priesthood in the worship of God around the tabernacle. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Bring the tribe of Levi near, present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him." So the priests are all, in a sense, an extension of Aaron. Aaron was the priest who was the high priest, and everyone else was there, in a sense, to assist him. These were all assistant pastors, assistant priests, and Aaron was like the senior priest or the senior pastor. In verse 7, they shall attend to his needs, whatever he needs to get the work done, the needs of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of meeting, to do the work of the tabernacle. And that's something that is to be, if you look at it from the perspective of true ministry and how I think the leadership of a church even is supposed to work, it's not about exalting if you want to call him that, the head guy. Aaron was the head guy. But it wasn't about Aaron. It was about getting the work done. Aaron just happens to be the one. God believes in order, and so he has this chain of command. He has order. He has order everywhere. Everywhere you look, God is a God of order. It tells us that in 1 Corinthians. God is a God of order, doesn't like confusion, and so he organizes everything. That's what all of this is. It's him organizing all of the people because they're going to be doing this day in and day out, day in and day out. I want you organized, otherwise there's going to be mistakes made. And so he keeps everything tight. He kept everything together. And so over the priests, I'm going to appoint one guy, and that man is Aaron. And Aaron is going to oversee all the work that goes on around the tabernacle. He's responsible. Everyone doesn't cater to him, but he is the one who has to answer to the Lord when things go wrong. So he's going to have to hold everyone in account, so to speak. And that's what is happening here. Verse 8, they also shall attend to all the furnishings of the tabernacles of meeting, to the needs of the children of Israel, to do the work of the tabernacle. And you shall give the Levites to Aaron and his sons. They are given entirely to him from among the children of Israel. Now, these are thousands of them. We're talking thousands of people. Aaron and his sons and all of the priests, there was a lot of people. There was a lot of people there. Now the Levites, all of the Levites, are joining in to be a part of this ministry team. So you might have been thinking, as you think about the slaughter that would take place on the Temple Mount later on in Jesus' day, when they would have the Passover celebration. That's 200,000 families, maybe more, and each family needing a lamb sacrificed, slaughtered on that day, butchered, and some of it put on the fire, some of it given back to the family. And you're thinking, how in the world do they do all of that? Well, there are tens of thousands of priests and Levites standing by, ready to do this task at the tabernacle and at the Temple Mount. So I'll tell you, it was a busy place, and that's what was happening on those days. And so you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall attend or oversee to their priesthood. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. No place in the priesthood for someone who is not a believer. He has no business being there. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified to myself all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. Remember, he made that law. All the firstborn belong to me. You're to dedicate them to me. They're sanctified. They're set apart for me. And God says, but here's what I'm going to do. I'll trade you, your firstborn children, for all the Levites. And so he just took all the Levites. And he said, they're going to be my team. And you can keep your firstborn. Though they are mine, I'm going to let you keep them anyway. And so now he's developed or adopted this whole tribe of people to be his. In verse 14, then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, saying, number the children of Levi by their fathers' houses, by their families. You shall number every male from a month old and above. So the males who were going to war had to be at least 20 years old. And we're going to see later that that's going to actually kind of change a little bit, go to 30 years old and then up to 50. So there's a 20-year window that you could be part of the army. And then here he's now looking for the Levites because it's a different task. And he wants them to be a month old. You remember Samuel wasn't very old when his mother Hannah brought him into the temple and gave him away to become a priest in the temple with Eli. And so this was all the beginning of training children in the work of the ministry. It's a good thing. Train them while they're young to know what is expected of them, what is right, and how they're to serve the Lord. And when you train them that way, they actually may grow up to have a right life, a good life. And so God is numbering them from a month old and above, anyone who is of the tribe of Levi. So Moses numbered them according to the word of the Lord as he was commanded. Here is the obedient servant Moses. He does what he's supposed to do. These were the sons of Levi by their families. And the sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And those three divisions make up three segments and three different responsibility groupings of the tasks required to keep the tabernacle functioning properly and to be the carriers of the tabernacle and all of its furnishings throughout the wilderness experience and journeys. Verse 18, Gershon is divided into their families, the sons of Kohath by their families, and the sons of Merari by their families in verse 20. Verse 22, those who were numbered according to the number of all the males from a month old and above, of these who were numbered before there were 7,500. That is of the Gershonites, those of Gershon. They were 7,500. And they were to camp, it says, verse 23, behind the tabernacle and westward. So now God is giving them also their parking spot. This is where you're going to park. Every time we stop, your family is going to set up on the west side, all of you in your tents, you're going to be between the tabernacle of meeting and the people. You see, the priest, that was his job. He was to mediate, or to be in between, if you will, between the people and God. And so that's why none of the people were allowed to park next to the tabernacle. There was always someone between them. Of course, we take that to the New Testament. Jesus is the one between us and God now. No man comes between us and the Lord. And then Kohath in verse 25, their duties of the children of Gershon in the temple of meeting included the tabernacle, the tent with its covering, the screen of the door, and their job was to care for that, take it down, put it up, carry it through the wilderness. And verse 27, from Kohath came different families, and verse 28, according to the number of all these families, from a month old and above, there were 8,600 keeping charge of the sanctuary. And these families were to park on the south side, it says in verse 29. And what God is doing here is taking these tribes and families and dividing up the labor. There was labor that had to be done. It's a lot of work. As I said, they're going to take it down and put it up many, many, many times through the course of the 40 years of wanderings. And so there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And so he was dividing it up. And every time, this was their task. And their duty, verse 31, included the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the utensils of the sanctuary with which they ministered, the screen, and all the work, and on and on. A lot of work was to be done. And this was a special task. They get to move the ark, which was dangerous. I wonder if they got hazard pay. In verse 33, from Merari came these other families. Verse 34, 6,200 of them. Verse 35, they shall park on the north side of the tabernacle, and the appointed duty of the children of Merari included the boards of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, its sockets, its utensils, all the work that related to anything that had to do with these things. This is the task, the responsibility, the duty of the children of Merari. And they will park then on the east side, it tells us on verse 38. I'm sorry about that. They parked on the north side. In verse 38 is where Moses, Aaron, and their families would be. Those who were to camp before the tabernacle on the east, before the tabernacle meeting, were Moses, Aaron, and his sons. And they were to keep the charge of the sanctuary to meet the needs of the children of Israel. But the outsiders who came near was to be put to death. This was only, strictly, absolutely for believers and no one else. And it reminds us a bit of heaven. The church is different. The church, we can have non-believers come to church because we want them to come. We want them to hear our praises of God. We want them to hear about our God. We want them to give their lives to God. We want non-believers to come to church. We don't want non-believers in the ministry. Of course not. That would be silly. But we do want them to come to church. But what God is saying here is non-believers, if you look at this congregation, if you will, is somewhat of a picture of heaven. No one who is a non-believer is going to heaven. It's not going to happen. And so these, he says, have to be put to death. This is only for God's people. The total of these different families, as it tells us, all the families of the Levites in verse 39, from a month old and above were 22,000 people. So 22,000 male Levites and priests were available, which you might call them an army of ministers, though they were not soldiers. And as I said, that many people would be needed to meet the great demand of the Passover slaughter that would happen every year. Verse 40, then the Lord said to Moses, number all of the firstborn males of the children of Israel from a month old and above. The firstborn males, and most likely these were the firstborn males who were born since they had left Egypt. As we find out, their number's going to be very similar. We'll find out here in just a moment. Number them, and not the Levites. Now, this is the whole rest of the congregation. Now, remember, we had 603,000 male Israelites from the age of 20 on up. 603,000. That does not include anyone younger than that, nor does it include any of the women, nor did it include the Levites. So we're looking at a congregation of Israel of better than probably 2 million people. That's what we were saying from the book of Exodus. About 2 million people going through the wilderness, and it was a miracle. You think we've got an immigration problem. Can you imagine this crowd of people just traveling all throughout that region and then camping out right on the edge of the Jordan River and looking over into the Promised Land? I'm telling you, it couldn't be more applicable to what we're seeing today in our country as they camp out on the other side of the Rio Grande and looking across and thinking, that's our promised land. I want to go there. There's promise in our country. We have a desirable country. Granted, many of us think it was more desirable at one time, but it's still the greatest thing going right now today in our world. And so, I don't blame people for wanting to come here, but this was an immigration problem. 2 million people who have, by the time they get to the Promised Land, they are seasoned at war. They are veteran war fighters. They understand that sort of a thing. And but now he has numbered the Levites, 22,000. Now he wants to take all of the younger ones, and I want you to, all those who were just the firstborn in their family. That's what we're talking about. So verse 42, he numbered them all. And God said, they're mine in verse 41. These are all mine. And in verse 43, he said, all the firstborn males, according to the number of names from a month old and above, those who were numbered of them were 22,273. So 22,000 Levites, 22,273 from the rest of the population. There's a difference of 273 males. Well, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levites, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites, instead of their livestock, the Levites shall be mine, for I am the Lord. And in order to redeem the 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, who are more than the number of the Levites, I'm going to allow you to buy them back. You can't find 273 more Levites, so we're going to have them sort of pay so that we can give back the 273 back to the general population, so to speak. And so he's letting them sort of balance the books. He wanted the books to be clean, if you want to look at it that way. And so 5 shekels is what he put on each soul, on each individual in verse 47. And in verse 50, from the firstborn of the children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, and you divide that by 5, and it gives you 273. So the idea is this is the ransom price, or the redemption price of someone, of God to balance his books. And Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and his sons according to the word of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. Well, now we come to the different duties of the children of the Levites, the priests, and what they do. In chapter 4, Kohath the census was taken of the sons of Kohath, of the children of Levi, by their families. And verse 3, from 30 years old and above. So this is the real work of the ministry. I said soldiers, I meant the ministry. This is the work of the ministry between 30 years old and above. It's curious how when Jesus began his ministry, he was 30. And so it's possible that's why he waited till then. We don't know. But that's anyway the way it came about. In verse 5, when the camp prepares to journey, Aaron and his sons shall come, and they shall take down the covering veil and cover the ark of the testimony with it. So remember, the ark was a dangerous piece of furniture. No one was able to see it. No one was able to touch it. It represented the very presence of God, and no one was holy enough to go into the presence of God. In order to get into that small chamber, they had to go through an entire cleansing process so that they would be considered ceremonially clean just to walk in. And that was just one person, the high priest, one day of the year, and he was able to go in. So every time they had to move, this process had to be done. Aaron and the priests had to come and do this. Nobody else was responsible for it. They had to take this veil, the veil that was separating the two rooms, and cover the ark. So that's the first thing to be done. No one can see it. No one's going to look at it. Then they're going to be able to move it from there. In fact, you can go all the way down to the verse 15. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. For these are the things in the tabernacle of meeting, which the sons of Kohath are to carry. What an honor, what a privilege, a duty for them to carry this. Was extremely a precious position that they had. And so they appointed, in verse 16, the appointed duty of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, is the oil for the light. Another important duty, as it symbolized, of course, the presence of the Lord. In verse 17, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, do not cut off the tribe of the families of the Kohathites from among the Levites, but do this in regard to them, that they may live and not die when they approach the most holy things. Aaron and his sons shall go in and appoint each of them to his service and his task. So this is an important task. Let's not let the Kohathites expose themselves to unnecessary risk. Aaron, you and your sons be responsible to cover the ark and all of those special articles or artifacts that are inside the tabernacle of meeting. They're so holy. We don't want just anyone messing with that. You guys are anointed. You have the cleansing process. We're going to let you do all of that. And once everyone does their part. And as a result, everyone depends on each other. The whole people do their part, but they all depend on one another as well. In verse 21 through about 28 is the task of the Gershonites. And they had the census taken, 30 years old and above, all who enter to perform the service, to do the work in the tabernacle of meeting. I like this verse 24. This is the service of the families of the Gershonites. Notice, in serving and carrying. That was their ministry. They were called to carry stuff. Maybe you're called to carry stuff. Maybe you're called to do something that doesn't seem glamorous. And you think, well, I want to teach, or I want to preach, or I want to do... Not everyone's called to that. These men were called to carry things. And they showed up on time. They showed up when they needed to show up. They did what they had to do when it was time to do it. And then they walked away and they said to one another, great job, guys. Great job. But to everyone else, maybe across the way on the other side of the tabernacle, they were saying, we got to carry the ark. And these guys, they just get to carry, some pole or something. Nothing big, nothing that important. But everyone had to do something. And I think of that verse in Ephesians 4 where it says the whole body joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share and causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. That's the Christian perspective. That's the Christian way in the Christian body, the Christian church, that we all do our part. No complaining. No one needs to try and, vie for the limelight. Not everyone can be in the limelight. The limelight is reserved for a few people. I hate to put it that way, but it's really for a few people that God says, I want you to do that. It's not because anyone's better than anyone else. God just says, I want you to do that. And you, I want you to carry stuff. And you, I want you to clean stuff. And you, I want you to put stuff away and organize things and make sure that everything gets done. But not everyone needs to be in the limelight. And it's dangerous, in fact, when everyone tries to position for the limelight and causes hard feelings, and it's not good. In verse 25, it says, they shall carry the curtains of the tabernacle of meeting with its covering and its badger skin. And that was their divine calling, carrying curtains for Jesus. Well, for the Lord, in this case. Verse 28, this is the service of the families of the Gershonites in the tabernacle of meeting and their duties. And they were under the authority of Ithamar, the son of Aaron. In Merari, verse 30, they had the service to do the work of the Lord at the tabernacle of meeting. And this is what they must carry as all their service for the tabernacle of meeting. The boards, they carry wood. They carry the boards for the tabernacle, the bars, the pillars, the sockets, and everything else. In verse 33, this is their service. This is the service of the families of Merari. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm telling you this is what I want you to do, and I want you to obey it. And if you're carrying wood for God, do it with joy in your heart. If you're just a carrier, do it with joy. And thank the Lord that you get to carry stuff for Him. And that's an attitude, really, an attitude of servanthood. And we are to be the servants of the Lord. And not everyone is the mouthpiece of the Lord. But we are all servants of the Lord. And as I've said already, in many ways already, this study, that we have to just do what the Lord tells us to do. Be okay with it. And all of the census of the Levites in the rest of this chapter 4, they're all numbered, have different positions, different amounts, and all the different tribes, the different family members are broken up into different places and where they're positioned. And brings us to chapter 5. Weird chapter. We're going to run into a few weird chapters. But the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. And remember, there were these rules against uncleanness, and by uncleanness we refer to ceremonially unclean. They were unable to approach the tabernacle, but if you rubbed against someone who was ceremonially unclean, that made you unclean. So then you had to go out of the camp as well. So the idea here is if you're ceremonially unclean, just go out of the camp and get that resolved. Get it resolved in the proper way, and then you'll be welcome back in, if able. Like, for instance, someone who had a physical ailment, these things were to be kept outside. God did not. He wanted a clean camp. He wanted a clean start. And all who were ceremonially unclean needed to go out of the camp until they were made clean. And this tells us about the standard of God's holiness. This was His standard, and it's His camp. so we don't have anything to say about it, and if you're part of that camp. And then in verses 5 through 10, it talks about an offense. If you've offended someone or if you've done some wrong, you had to confess your wrong to the one that you have wronged, and then pay the fee, the cost of that offense. In verse 6, when a man or a woman commits any sin that men commit in unfaithfulness against the Lord, and that person is guilty, and he shall confess the sin which he has committed, he shall make restitution for his trespass in full, plus 1/5 of it, and give it to the one who is wrong. And if the man has somehow died, in verse 8, there's no relative remaining for whom restitution may be made for the wrong, then he had to give it to the priests, and the priests were to put it to use in the sanctuary. So there's a necessity for confession. Confession is so very important because sometimes we don't want to admit that we've done wrong. God is pressing this point. He's pressing it. I need you to confess it. It's good for you. It's necessary. You have to admit when you've done wrong. A lot of people don't want to do that. It's not. None of us want to be wrong. None of us want to admit that we were wrong. But we start that way in life. We are wrong. We have sin. We have the sin nature. So the chances that we're going to wrong someone are very good in our lives. And so when we do that, let's do everything we can to be at peace with one another and make things right. And sometimes it just begins with a simple confession, even to one's self first. I wronged that person. Maybe I should fix it. Maybe I should do the right thing. Maybe I should go and try and make amends. And some people can do that easily, whereas others, it's like pulling teeth to get them to admit that they've done wrong. That is a stubbornness that is similar to witchcraft, as according to the Bible, that's what stubbornness is like witchcraft. And that witchcraft is something that takes you away from God, and stubbornness does the same thing. It's going to take you away from God. So if you have a stubborn streak in you, you would do well to confess that to the Lord and deal with it. Verse 11, real bizarre. The rest of this chapter is just really bizarre. It's about concerning, the title on in my Bible says, Concerning Unfaithful Wives. If there's an unfaithful wife, then she should own up to it. But if a man accuses a woman of being unfaithful, even though he has no evidence of her unfaithfulness, then it talks about this spirit of jealousy in verse 14. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, upon the husband, and he becomes jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife, although she has not defiled himself. So in other words, sometimes a man's jealousy is justified because of a flirtatious, floozy woman. Is that okay to say that? I don't know. Is that? You guys tell me afterward. Sometimes they're justified, for feeling jealousy, but then sometimes they're not justified for feeling jealousy. Jealousy, of course, for the most part, is a wrong thing. It's a sin. But there are times when it's justified, meaning you never want your wife flirting with someone else. You should feel some sort of jealousy when that happens. It would be right in a situation like that. What you do with your jealousy might be wrong. That's where you draw the line. But the sensation of jealousy is, wow, I don't like that. I don't like you to do that. So you need to stop that. Oh, you're just being jealous. Yeah, I am. So don't do it. You stop doing that. And don't make me jealous by your behavior, kind of a thing. So there's a right thing there, right way to be. But here is a man just saying, I think my wife's being unfaithful. Why? What makes you think that? Well, I don't know. I just have this feeling. So you could take her to the elders, and they do this whole thing where they bring like a jealousy offering in their hands made of grain. And they make the woman, they uncover her head, which would have been wrong in that day, and they she has to prove herself innocent, is the way she would have to do it. And then they give her this special bitter water, they call it in this passage, and if your stomach swells, then you're guilty. And if it doesn't swell, then you're innocent. Now, again, this is because the guy just kind of felt jealous. No evidence, no other than just the sensation he had. So I'm just thankful that we don't have that sort of thing. However, we still have jealousy. And we have people who become jealous unnecessarily. There's some guys who are just jealous, and they can't seem to get away from their girl and let her have a little peace. And anyway, I'm trying to wind up because I'm looking at the time. So read the chapter, you try and make sense of it, and then you come tell me what you think about it afterward. But let me know if I said something wrong. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your wisdom of your word. There are so many things that we want to learn. A lot of these things are sort of out of reach for us in that they're a cultural thing that we don't have today. So trying to apply them or make sense of them these are very difficult chapters. But at the same time, very interesting. And so teach us the lessons. I know we don't need to know the procedures since we won't be involved in much of them. But Lord, help us to find out where we can apply your word to our hearts, to our lives, and then live as we should in your presence. And by all means, the lesson we can take away is our need for holiness. We all have a greater need for holiness in our lives. And you've even told us in the New Testament to pursue holiness, for without which we would not be able to see the Lord. And so, Lord, bless us now, your children, as we do our own heart search and make sure we're right with you always. In Jesus' name, amen.